This grip cap does not have anything to align it. And that is one fine little slot in that screw head. After sanding the wood down a little bit, I mean, you know, it has to be down a little smaller than what it was when I started because I've taken some scratches out. I'm just going to check to make sure this thing still fits where it used to without hanging. Anything that's sticking over, the plastic sticking over the wood can hang on something, your clothes or a twig or a piece of brush or anything. So I put it back on there. And I'll take my final paper, which is 220, and run back over the wood and take off any edge that's sticking out. I used to have a guy named Bob, somebody, I can't remember his last name. He was from Atlanta. He dealt in Colt pistols. He loved single action Army Colt pistols and other revolvers. He loved Colt pistols. He dealt in them. And I made him a lot of grips. And where that back strap of that Colt sticks out and your grips are between it, when he'd come to pick it up, he'd take his finger and he'd run it across that back strap from the grip to the back strap and back down to the other grip with his eyes closed. And he'd just run it back and forth. He didn't want to feel any difference between wood and metal. He was a very meticulous, demanding customer. I loved him. He'd do that. He'd rub it 4 or 5 times and then he'd smile. And then he'd open his eyes. Yeah, I love that kind of professionalism. He was a professional. I've learned a lot from my customers over the years. Well, this one is ready to be stained, and it has a bit of a gray cast to it, especially over here. This seems to be some sapwood, and this seems to be the browner heartwood. And to keep that gray from being too prominent, I'm going to put a kind of a reddish stain on this gun. And it's actually going to turn out pretty close to what it was when I got it. The stain that was on there was kind of reddish. This is where the crack was that I glued a couple days ago. Inside, it travels back to about here. You can see it where the glue came out. Now that will fill with finish and with dust, and that crack won't be visible when I get done here. There's one little tiny blob of glue sticking out right there, little bitty thing. Trying to sand off a blob is problematic, because your sandpaper will go over the blob and back down and over the blob and back down, and what you'll end up with is a dark dot in the middle with the sanded area all around it. So you have to be careful. Either use a straight block, which keeps you a good flat edge, you know, a good flat surface, and you're only hitting the high spot, or just take a razor blade or a good sharp knife and just cut the hump off, and then when you sand it, even with your hand will bridge over, not bridge over, but it'll clean it up. Your hand is flat enough, your thumb, it takes a little practice. You know, it's not, everybody's hand is not as trained as everybody else's hand. You need a little bit of practice on. There is technique involved with sanding. You look at a good body man that sanded every kind of little edge and corner you can imagine. Body men know how to sand. Painters, usually, if they got any age to them at all, will know how to sand. Furniture makers, I guess. I've spent about half of my life sanding something. There's a lot of little dings on this thing. A lot of them. I don't know what in the world they use this thing for. There's a lot of little tiny dings just everywhere. Some of them are not so little. Right there is a heavy gash. Right here's a whole bunch of little half moon, crescent moon shaped little dings right in here I've got to get out. There's a real good one, a real bad one that goes from the stock over into the checkering, and it's got the checkering actually cut out right there. You can't get everything out because the stock will be a lot smaller, but you can get a lot of it out. And then when you refinish, your finish, just the fact that the finish is new and even all the way across, it tends to hide some of those little tiny dings. Your eye gravitates towards the new finish instead of the little ding that's there, not only missing wood, but it's missing finish. If that makes sense. This brings back memories of a Winchester Model 21 forearm I did a few months ago. It's shaped a lot like it. Beaver tail. Shaped a lot like it. I'm just going to get as much of that gouge out as I can and call it good. I don't use filler. I've seen people that request filler. I've talked to people that wanted to just put some putty in there. The only thing I get that's anywhere close to using filler is if I have a defect or something. You can put super glue in that and then put the dust in there with it if it's the right kind. But now if it's a ding like that, it'll leave a dark place that looks, to me, it looks worse than just putting up with the ding. If you're wondering why I'm sanding here and there's nothing to sand out, I have to keep this side and this shape and this side, the shape symmetrical, and I took about probably 30 thousandths or more off of this side, so I've got to make this one match it. That's why I'm grinding this down. And I'm not using any real particular care about sanding cross grain, because all that'll come out. I'm not sanding here, I'm shaping. I'm reshaping one side to match the other. Ready to be stained. Most of the stocks I make, I put this right here on them. Red mahogany Minwax. This one especially because it's got this kind of a gray tint to it. And this Minwax stain is probably not a day over 25 years old. It's kind of turned into a gel almost, but it's still the right color. And I'm thinking if I buy some new stuff, it'll be so thin it may be different. I don't know. Color is color, no matter what the consistency of it is. Color is still color. The pigment of it is still the same. It might, I don't know, it may have intensified because some of the solvent may have flashed off in 25 years. Could be. But it's still a really, really good color. I use a lot of, I put red mahogany on most everything I do. Either that or just natural.